The Bookstore of Lost Souls. The bookstore appeared one rainy afternoon as if it had always been there, nestled between a crumbling old tailor shop and a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and bread. The sign above the door read, in faded gold letters, The Bookstore of Lost Souls. For most people who passed by on their way to work, it seemed unremarkable. Its windows were clouded with dust, and the front door creaked with disuse, giving the impression that the store hadn't been visited in years. But for those who noticed it, truly noticed it, it was as though the store was calling to them. Mara had lived in the city for nearly a decade. She had walked this street hundreds of times, but had never seen the bookstore before. That day, the rain poured in thick sheets, blurring the world in a watery haze. She had just lost her job, laid off from a publishing house where she'd worked tirelessly for years. The news had come that morning, and the rest of her day had been spent in a fog of disbelief, wandering aimlessly, soaked to the bone and too stunned to even call her friends or go home. When she saw the bookstore, something in its presence tugged at her, like a hand pulling her gently toward the door. Her breath caught in her throat, and before she knew it, she was standing in front of it, her fingers tracing the rough wood of the doorframe. The bell above the door tinkled softly as she stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, and the smell of old paper and ink filled the air. Bookshelves lined the walls, stretching high up to the ceiling, and every surface seemed to be cluttered with volumes of all shapes and sizes. Some were leather-bound with cracked spines, others were worn paper backs, their covers faded and soft from countless readings. Behind the counter stood a tall man with silver hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that gleamed with the color of storm clouds. His face was thin and sharp, his expression unreadable, but there was something otherworldly about him, as though he were both ancient and timeless. He looked up from the book he was reading when Mara entered. "Welcome," he said, his voice deep and resonant as if it echoed in the space between the shelves. "You've come to the right place." Mara hesitated. I'm just looking." The man's lips curled into a small smile. "Everyone says that, but they always leave with something they didn't know they needed." Mara blinked, feeling oddly unsettled. She looked around the store, trying to distract herself from the man's piercing gaze. There was something strange about the place. The books were arranged haphazardly, with no apparent order. There were no sections, no signs to indicate where one genre ended and another began. And yet, she felt as though every book had been placed exactly where it was meant to be. "Go ahead," the man said, nodding toward the shelves. "Take your time. You'll know it when you see it." Not knowing what else to do, Mara began to browse. She ran her fingers over the spines of the books, each one radiating a faint warmth as if they were alive. As she walked deeper into the store, the sounds of the rain outside faded, and the quiet seemed to grow thicker, almost tangible. She picked up a book at random, a small, unassuming volume with a simple brown cover. The title was embossed in gold, ****, A Life Forgotten. ***, intrigued, she opened it and began to read. The first line sent a shiver down her spine. Mara had always felt as though something was missing, as though her life had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and now she was wandering, lost, in the aftermath of a decision she couldn't remember making. Her heart skipped a beat. How did this book know her name? She flipped to the next page, her hands trembling. The story continued, describing in vivid detail the events of her life, her childhood, her dreams of becoming a writer, her struggles in the city, and the crushing disappointment of losing her job that very morning. It was her life, written out on the pages before her. She slammed the book shut, her pulse racing. "What is this?" she whispered, half to herself, half to the eerie silence of the store. "Your story," came the reply. Mara whirled around to see the man standing behind her, his eyes gleaming. "This is what we do here. We hold the stories of lives, yours, mine, and many others. Sometimes people lose their way, forget who they are, or wish they could rewrite the past. The books are here to remind them." Mara's mind reeled. "But how? How does this book know everything about me?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The bookstore is not like others. It finds you when you need it most. When you are lost, your story is waiting for you here. Mara stared at him, unable to speak. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned the book over in her hands. She had so many questions, but none seemed to matter in the face of the overwhelming reality that her life was laid bare on these pages. "What if I don't like my story?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. The man's smile widened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something darker in his gaze. "Ah, that's the real question, isn't it? Many who come here are dissatisfied with their stories. Some wish to forget, to change the past, or rewrite the future. And that is what we offer a chance to rewrite your life." Mara's throat tightened. The idea was both intoxicating and terrifying. "How?" The man stepped closer, his presence looming over her. "You can choose a new story. One where the things you regret never happened, or where the things you long for come to pass. But there is always a cost." "What kind of cost?" "The kind you don't fully understand until it's too late." Mara's fingers tightened around the book, her mind racing. Could she really change her life? And do the mistakes erase the pain and create a new path? The temptation was overwhelming. But the man's words echoed in her mind. There was always a cost. "What happens if I don't change anything?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man tilted his head, considering her. "Then you leave here with your story as it is. But you will remember this place, and you will carry the weight of your decision with you. You will know that you had the chance to change everything, and you chose not to." Mara's chest tightened. She looked down at the book in her hands, the weight of her own life pressing down on her. Could she live with the choices she'd made? Could she carry on, knowing that this strange, magical place had given her an opportunity to rewrite her story? She thought of the years of hard work that had led to nothing, the relationships that had crumbled, the dreams she had set aside. She thought of the long, lonely nights spent wondering if she had made the wrong choices. And yet, she was afraid. Afraid of what might happen if she changed her story, afraid of what she might lose in the process. Finally, she looked up at the man, her voice steady. "I think I'll keep my story the way it is." The man's expression didn't change, but there was something like approval in his eyes. "Very well. But remember, not everyone who walks out of here gets a second chance." Mara nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. She placed the book back on the shelf and turned to leave. The bell above the door tinkled softly as she stepped outside into the rain, the weight of her decision settling in her chest. As she walked away, the bookstore seemed to fade into the gray, rainy day, disappearing as quietly as it had appeared. And though Mara never saw it again, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, waiting for someone else to find it when they needed it most.